You know that moment when you get home after a long day and all you want is to pull into your driveway, grab your bags, and flop on the couch? Yeah, I used to look forward to that little daily ritual, until my neighbor decided my driveway was actually his personal parking space. It started off as an occasional annoyance, the kind you roll your eyes at but don't really do much about. I'd come home to see his beat-up silver sedan sitting smack in the middle of my driveway like it owned the place. And every time, he'd give me that same dismissive wave, like he was doing me a favor by promising it was just for a sec. Only a sec turned into 15 minutes, then an hour. Eventually, it became a regular thing. Sometimes I'd drive up and he wouldn't even be there, just his car lounging across my property while he disappeared into his house or went off who knows where. I live in a small neighborhood where everyone knows each other's business, and maybe that's why he felt so entitled to do it. We're not exactly strangers. We'd exchanged a few neighborly nods and chatted about trash pickup and the weather, but that basic courtesy clearly didn't extend to respecting my driveway. The final straw was last Friday. I had wrapped up work early because I was heading out of town for the weekend. My trunk was stuffed with bags, and all I could think about was how good it would feel to hit the road, blast some music, and forget about life's little hassles for a couple of days. But when I turned onto my street, there it was again. That same crappy sedan parked right in front of my garage. No note, no explanation, not even the courtesy of pretending it was temporary. I just sat there for a moment, engine idling, staring at it. Part of me wanted to march over, bang on his door, and yell my head off. But instead, I took a deep breath and thought, no, not this time. If he wanted to act like my driveway was public property, he was about to get a reality check. One that would last a lot longer than just for a sec. And honestly, as annoyed as I was in that moment, a tiny part of me felt satisfied. Like maybe the universe had handed me a perfect little opportunity to teach a lesson without saying a single word. Looking back, I can pinpoint exactly when this whole mess began. It was sometime late last fall, right around when the leaves started to turn and everyone was getting ready for the holidays. My neighbor, let's call him Dave, had a bunch of relatives visiting. At first, I didn't mind. It was the holidays, after all. Everyone was juggling extra cars and trying to figure out where to put them. The first couple of times, he actually knocked on my door to ask if it was okay for one of his guests to park in my driveway, just overnight. I agreed, thinking it was a temporary thing and that maybe, come January, life would go back to normal. But it didn't. By February, I noticed Dave himself was starting to use my driveway whenever he felt like it. He never asked anymore. Sometimes I'd come home and see him standing there on his porch, chatting on his phone, watching me pull up behind his car. He wouldn't even acknowledge that he was in the way. I tried to be patient. I'd honk lightly or call over to him, "Hey, can you move your car?" And he'd saunter over, give me a lazy shrug, and say the same thing every time. "Oh, it's just for a sec." Like my time didn't matter, like my own driveway was a convenience he was entitled to. After the 5th or 6th time, I decided to be more direct. I walked over, knocked on his door, and said, as calmly as I could, "Listen, Dave, I really need you to stop parking in my driveway. I don't want to come home and have to wait. It's my property." He gave me a look that landed somewhere between amusement and annoyance, like I was making a big deal out of nothing. He promised he'd try to remember, which, of course, meant absolutely nothing. Days turned into weeks, and it kept happening. There was the Tuesday morning I was running late for a dentist appointment, only to find his car blocking me in. I pounded on his door for a good 5 minutes before he finally emerged, looking irritated, as if I was the inconvenience. There was the night I got home in the pouring rain, exhausted from work, only to discover he'd decided to have friends over again. For cars were crammed into the street, and his was in my driveway. By the time he came out to move it, I was soaked to the skin. Still, I didn't want to escalate things. I tried notes on his windshield. I tried polite texts. I even left a voicemail explaining that this was a consistent problem and that if it continued, I'd have no choice but to contact the HOA or get the car towed. He never replied. But the next time I saw him, he smirked and said, "I got your little message." That's when I realized he wasn't clueless. he was just being a jerk on purpose. Maybe he thought he was asserting dominance in some weird suburban way. Maybe he assumed I'd never actually do anything about it. Or maybe he genuinely believed that my property was there to make his life easier. The worst part was how casual he made it all seem. Like every time I tried to stand up for myself, he'd find a way to downplay it. "Relax," he'd say. "You're overthinking this." I started to resent that line more than anything. As if respecting someone else's space was optional. As if my frustration was irrational. By the time spring rolled around, I was done making excuses for him. I was tired of feeling like the bad guy for simply wanting to pull into my own driveway. So when I turned onto my street that Friday afternoon and saw his car sitting there again, no explanation, no apology, it was like something clicked. All those months of pent-up irritation, all the condescending shrugs and smug little grins, they piled up in my chest until I knew I wasn't going to let it slide this time. I didn't yell. I didn't stomp over to his porch or leave another note. I was going to handle it differently. And maybe, just maybe, he'd finally understand how it felt to be inconvenienced. I didn't plan the revenge in some dramatic, premeditated way. The idea came to me in that instant, as I sat in my car staring at Dave's sedan hogging my driveway yet again. At first, I felt the familiar surge of frustration. My instinct was to do what I'd always done. Park in the street, haul my bags past his car, and fume quietly while telling myself it wasn't worth the hassle. But then it hit me. I was leaving town for the weekend. I wasn't going to need my driveway at all. And if he was so comfortable parking wherever he pleased, maybe it was time for him to discover what happened when I stopped being the considerate one. I pulled forward slowly until my front bumper was just inches from his rear bumper. I put the car in park, turned off the engine, and sat there for a second, processing how satisfying this already felt. The more I thought about it, the better it seemed. He'd never asked permission. He'd never given a heads up. He'd never once thought about whether it inconvenienced me. So why should I give him the courtesy of a warning this time? I pictured him coming out later, maybe planning to run a quick errand or meet friends for dinner, only to find my car neatly blocking him in. He'd probably pound on my door or blow up my phone in outrage. But I wouldn't be there. I was about to drive off for the weekend, no schedule to keep, no plans to come back until Sunday night, which meant he'd be stuck exactly where he was. It wasn't just about being petty, though yes, I'll admit there was a certain petty satisfaction in the thought. It was about making a point he couldn't shrug off or belittle. He'd always told me it was just for a sec. Well, this time it wasn't going to be a sec. This time, he could experience the inconvenience of having his time and plans disrupted. I started to imagine all the scenarios. Would he call a tow truck? Probably not, since he knew he was the one trespassing. Would he try to reach me? Absolutely. Would he finally realize that parking in someone else's driveway isn't just a harmless quirk? As those thoughts settled in, the annoyance in my chest loosened a little. For the first time in months, I felt like I had the upper hand. Not because I was going to scream or make threats, but because I was simply going to stand my ground in a way he couldn't ignore. I didn't want to be the neighbor who escalated things to legal threats or HOA complaints, though I'd been close to doing it more than once. I just wanted a moment of clarity for him, a little mirror held up to his entitled behavior. Maybe it was petty. Maybe it was a bit passive-aggressive. But sometimes, when you've tried every polite approach and been dismissed over and over, a little petty revenge is the only language some people understand. So I took a deep breath, grabbed my overnight bags, and locked my car behind me. My driveway was finally mine again, and so was the last word in our long, ridiculous standoff. I stood there for a moment, car locked, bags slung over my shoulder, feeling the strangest mix of satisfaction and adrenaline. It wasn't every day I deliberately set a trap for someone, especially not a neighbor I still had to live next to. But this time it felt warranted. Before heading out, I decided to double-check everything. I didn't want to leave any way for Dave to spin this back on me. So I snapped a quick photo on my phone. His car sitting in my driveway, and mine parked right behind it, clear as day. I figured if he decided to get creative, say by trying to claim I'd blocked him without cause, I'd have proof that he was there first. After that, I went inside to grab the rest of my things. Even as I moved around my house, collecting my charger and double-checking that I hadn't left the oven on. My heart was thumping just a little faster than usual. I guess that's what happens when you know you're about to seriously inconvenience someone who's been doing the same to you for months. I loaded up my last bag, locked the front door, and walked past the 2 cars one more time. For a second, I wondered if I should leave a note. Some polite little message that said, "Since you love parking in my driveway, enjoy the weekend." But in the end, I decided it was better to say nothing at all. A note would have given him a target for his anger, or an excuse to pretend this was some kind of personal vendetta. No, silence was better. Silence and the cold reality of being trapped. I got into my friend's car. She'd agreed to pick me up, so I wouldn't have to leave my own vehicle on the street, and watched as my house and driveway disappeared in the rearview mirror. A part of me felt nervous, imagining all the ways this could go wrong. Maybe he'd call a tow truck and somehow try to send me the bill. Maybe he'd call the police. But I reminded myself again, he was the one trespassing. For the first couple of hours on the road, I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting to see it lighting up with messages. Sure enough, about 90 minutes after we left, the calls started. First, it was a single missed call. Then another. Then a text. "Dude, WTF. No apology. No acknowledgement that he was in the wrong. Just instant outrage that he'd been inconvenienced." I ignored it. An hour later, "Seriously, where are you? I need to get my car out." Again, I said nothing. I was determined to enjoy my weekend without letting him hijack my plans like he'd hijacked my driveway. A few hours later, he tried again. "Call me back. This isn't cool." I muted my phone and turned up the music. By the time we reached our destination, a cabin about 2 hours outside the city, I had 7 missed calls and 3 more texts, but none of them contained the one thing I'd been hoping to hear. Any sign that he realized he'd brought this on himself. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cold drink and watched the sun set behind the trees, thinking about how many times I'd been the one inconvenienced, the one forced to wait, the one expected to just get over it. This time, it was his turn. And there was something incredibly freeing about that. No more polite requests. No more wasted energy trying to reason with someone who clearly didn't care. I knew he'd probably be furious by the time I got home. Maybe he'd try to confront me. Maybe he'd pound on my door and demand an explanation. But I also knew that, deep down, he'd remember this weekend every time he thought about parking in my driveway again. I didn't do anything illegal. I didn't damage his property. I didn't yell or threaten or make a scene. I simply stopped accommodating his disrespect. And if he hated the feeling of being stuck and ignored, maybe, just maybe, he'd finally understand why I'd gotten fed up in the first place. When I finally got home Sunday evening, the street was quiet. The sky was turning that soft purple it gets just before dusk, and I remember feeling a little twinge of anticipation as we turned the corner. Sure enough, both cars were still there. My neighbor's sedan was exactly where I'd left it, trapped neatly between my garage door and my bumper, going nowhere. As my friend dropped me off, I could feel my phone buzzing in my pocket. Another message. Another demand to be set free. I didn't check it right away. I just walked up to the front door, unlocked it, and carried my bags inside. Only after I'd put everything down and poured myself a glass of water did I bother to look at the screen. There were more texts now, the tone increasingly desperate. "Are you home yet? Seriously, man. This is ridiculous. I have work tomorrow morning. You need to move your car now." I thought about replying. I almost did. But then I set the phone face down on the counter and took a long sip of water instead. After a few minutes, I heard a knock at the door. Not a polite knock, either, a hard, frustrated pounding. I took a breath and opened it to find Dave standing there, arms folded, looking like he'd been chewing on a lemon all weekend. "You done with your little stunt?" he demanded. I didn't rise to the bait. "I was out of town," I said evenly. "And you were parked in my driveway." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "So what, you decided to trap me here all weekend? You couldn't have just texted me?" "I did text you," I said calmly. "Remember all those times I asked you not to park here? Remember the notes? The voicemails?" He opened his mouth to fire back, then stopped. For a second, I thought I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Maybe realization, maybe embarrassment, but it vanished quickly, replaced by more indignation. "You could have told me you were leaving," he snapped. "Or," I said, "you could have parked in your own driveway, or on the street, or anywhere but on my property." We stood there for a few seconds, the silence stretching between us. He shifted his weight, like he wanted to keep arguing but couldn't quite find the next excuse. Finally, he threw his hands up. "Fine. Whatever. Just move your car." I nodded. "Give me 5 minutes." He stalked back to his porch without another word. I didn't rush. I put my glass in the sink, slipped on my shoes, and strolled out to the driveway. Even as I got behind the wheel, I could see him watching me from his steps, arms still crossed, face set in a tight scowl. I reversed out slowly, savoring the moment. For once, he was the one stuck waiting. He was the one forced to deal with someone else's schedule. As he climbed into his car, he didn't look at me. He didn't say thank you, didn't apologize. He just started the engine and drove off without a word. And you know what? I didn't need an apology, because from that day on, he never parked in my driveway again. Maybe it was the hassle of being trapped for 2 days. Maybe it was the embarrassment of having to admit he'd brought it on himself. Or maybe he finally realized that I wasn't going to keep tolerating it. Whatever the reason, the problem was solved. And every time I pulled into my empty driveway after that, I felt a little rush of satisfaction. Not because I'd humiliated him or gotten revenge, but because I'd finally drawn a line he couldn't cross without consequences. Turned out, all it took was one weekend of inconvenience to accomplish what months of polite requests never could. In the days after, I half expected Dave to try something petty in return. Maybe park on the sidewalk in front of my house, or glare at me every time we crossed paths. But he didn't. For the most part, he acted like nothing had happened. If we passed each other getting the mail or taking out the trash, he'd give me a tight, curt nod and keep walking. No more smirks. No more casual excuses about how it was just for a sec. I could tell he wasn't happy about what I'd done, but I think even he knew he didn't have a leg to stand on. He'd taken advantage of my patience for months, and when it finally caught up to him, there wasn't much he could say to spin the story in his favor. And honestly, that was the most satisfying part. It wasn't about revenge for the sake of it. It was about finally setting a boundary I should have enforced a long time ago. I tried to be the reasonable neighbor, the one who didn't escalate, who kept the peace. But sometimes, keeping the peace just enables the other person to keep disrespecting you. It took one weekend of him experiencing the exact frustration he'd been causing me to finally break the cycle. Since then, I've thought a lot about how easy it is to fall into that trap. Telling yourself it's not worth making a fuss, that it's easier to let little things slide. You give someone an inch, and before you know it, they've taken a mile and convinced you it's your job to accommodate them. Looking back, I realize I probably should have stood up for myself sooner. Not with yelling or threats, but with clear action. I used to think that made me petty. Now I see it for what it was. Standing up for my right not to be treated like a doormat. The funny thing is, I never heard him bring it up with any of the other neighbors. Maybe he was too embarrassed to admit he'd been stuck in my driveway all weekend because he'd ignored my requests. Maybe he knew everyone would have sided with me anyway. Either way, the message was clear. My driveway was off limits. Since then, every time I pull in and see the space empty, I feel a little surge of relief. It's one less thing to be annoyed about, one less reminder of how often we let people cross our boundaries just to avoid confrontation. And if I'm honest, it still makes me smile a little to think of him sitting there on Friday night, staring at my car and realizing he had nowhere to go. Call it petty if you want, but sometimes petty is exactly what gets the point across.